Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time we're going to check out some really cool details about the tabernacle courtyard, like the layout and what they used to build it all from Exodus chapter 38.
Awesome.
Our source today is an online Bible study from My Christian Space.
Oh, very cool.
It's interesting stuff. You ready to jump in?
I am. Let's do it.
All right, so we often focus on all the details of the tabernacle itself.
Yeah.
But the courtyard is really important too, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's the space where the Israelites basically transition from their everyday lives into worship. It was like a bridge between, the sacred and the secular.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Okay.
Okay, so first up, we've got this big altar for burnt offerings.
Right?
They say it's made of acacia wood and then overlaid with bronze.
Mm.
And they even give specific dimensions, which I always find interesting.
Yeah.
7.5 feet long and wide and 4.5 feet high.
Mm.
What always stands out to me is that bronze overlay.
Yeah.
Because, inside the tabernacle, you see gold everywhere, right? And they say that represents God's presence. So what do you think the bronze here means?
Oh, that's a really good question. And I think that difference in material is very intentional. I think about it this way. The bronze could symbolize the Israelites themselves. Like, they're not quite in the presence of God yet, not in that, fully divine space, but they're definitely on their way, and they're making their offering. So in a way, it's kind of like a visual, I don't know, like a representation of that spiritual journey.
Yeah. And it's not even to the altar itself. They go on to describe all these bronze tools, like pots and shovels and basins, even meat hooks and fire pans. It's a whole set. Why do you think they go into all that detail?
I think it shows how meticulous they were about their worship, Every little action, every little element had to be just right. Nothing was left to chance.
Yeah, it makes you wonder about how we approach worship today. Do we think about it with that same intentionality?
That's a good question.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting.
Yep.
They mention this bronze basin, but get this. It was made from the mirrors of the women serving at the entrance to the tent of meeting. What do you think about that?
Wow, what a detail. It tells us that the women were not just bystanders, right? They were very much involved in this whole project.
Yeah.
And they're offering these mirrors. They literally became a part of something holy.
Wow.
And I think it challenges us, how do we value the contributions that women are making in our faith communities, even today?
Yeah, it's easy to overlook those contributions.
Yeah.
So let's move on to talk about the construction of the courtyard itself.
Okay.
Okay, so they describe it kind of like a fabric fence, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And they give dimensions for each side, 150 feet long for the south and north sides, and then 75 feet long for the west and east side. So that's pretty huge.
Oh, yeah, it's a big space. But to me, the most interesting part is how it only has one single entrance on the east side.
Okay.
Why do you think that is?
Only one way in. Sounds pretty symbolic, right?
Yeah. Like they're saying there's only one way to approach God. You can't just wander in from any direction. You have to come through this specific entrance.
Oh, and another thing, it's facing east, towards the rising sun. So it's like they're looking towards, new beginning.
Towards the light. Yeah.
I noticed they also mentioned bronze pegs for both the tabernacle coverings and the courtyard posts. Do you think that's important too?
Oh, I think so, yeah. It's like they're anchoring everything physically and metaphorically using the same foundation, God's word.
Oh, interesting.
It just emphasizes that connection, that everything comes from that covenant with God.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so we've got this altar, this basin, the fabric fence.
Right.
And now we have this grand entrance. What does it look like?
Okay, so picture this. A woven screen, 30 feet long and 7.5 feet high, in blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, and then finely woven linen.
Wow.
So it's pretty different from that simpler courtyard design, isn't it?
Yeah, it sounds a lot more elaborate. What do you think that means?
Well, it's almost like they're saying, hey, entering God's presence is a big deal. It deserves this extra attention to detail and craftsmanship.
Yeah.
It makes you think about how we prepare ourselves to enter into worship today.
Oh, that's so true. And speaking of detail, they mention all these features. 4 posts, bronze sockets, silver hooks, and even silver overlaid capitals.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. They went all
Yeah, they were definitely putting their best foot forward, offering the best they had, to honor God.
Yeah. And they mentioned that it wasn't just one person doing this either. It was the Levites under Itamar, who was the son of Aaron the priest.
Right.
And they had Bezalel and Aholiab too, those skilled craftsmen. So it was definitely a community effort.
Definitely. A real team effort.
Yeah.
And they even give it a specific name, the Tabernacle of Testimony, What do you think about that?
Tabernacle of Testimony. It's like a testament to God's presence there and their covenant with him. It's amazing how they built that idea right into the name of the structure.
Right, like they're saying, this isn't just any building, it embodies our relationship with God. And that idea still matters today.
It really does. One more thing I'm curious about. They go into all this detail about the materials used in the construction and even give us a precise inventory of the gold, silver, and bronze. Why is that so important?
Well, they actually tell us that all those materials came from the Egyptians. Remember, the Israelites had been enslaved in Egypt, right? And now those same materials that were used to oppress them, they're using them to build a place to worship their God.
Wow, that's powerful.
Talk about turning things around. It's a powerful image of liberation and redemption.
It really is.
Yeah.
What was meant for evil was used by God for something beautiful and sacred.
Exactly. And they also give us that census detail. 603,550 men over 20 years old.
Wow, that's a lot.
I know, right? It just shows how much the Israelite community grew while they were in Egypt, just like God promised.
It's like their whole history is built into this tabernacle. Everything, from the materials to the people involved, tells a story of God's faithfulness and how he was with them. But what does all this mean for us today?
That's a great question, and one we should definitely explore, but how about we take a little break first and come back to that?
Sounds good to me.
We've been talking about so many interesting details about the tabernacle courtyard.
You know, right?
But you're right, we should connect all this back to our lives today. It can't just be some ancient history lesson.
Exactly. It's easy to get caught up in the details, but there are some really important truths in there for us.
Totally. I mean, the tabernacle wasn't just a building, right?
Right.
It represented God being present with his people. It was a constant reminder that he had made a covenant with them and that he was faithful.
And that courtyard, remember, with only that one entrance facing east. It really makes you think about approaching God with purpose.
It does.
You can't just wander in. You have to choose to enter into that sacred space.
It's like a buffer zone between the regular world and that Holy of Holies. A place to get ready, to purify yourself, to set aside all the distractions of normal life.
Yeah, and focus only on God.
Exactly.
It's like a spiritual reset button.
It is. And it's amazing how those physical structures they built were like a mirror of spiritual realities, you know?
Totally. And remember how it was the Levites who built the courtyard?
Mm-hmm.
And they were under Itamar's leadership? It just shows that everyone had to be involved.
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't just a job for the priests.
It took the whole community.
It did. It took skilled craftsmen, people to donate materials, everyone working together.
It really was a testament to their shared faith and commitment.
It was. And that name, the Tabernacle of Testimony, is so powerful, don't you think?
It really is. It wasn't just a place for God to dwell.
It was a testament to his faithfulness, a visible reminder that he was there with his people.
And all those details about the amounts of gold, silver, and bronze.
I know, right? They even give us an inventory.
It's like they're showing us how important it was to be good stewards of what they had been given. They didn't take it for granted at all.
No, they really didn't.
It makes you think, are we being good stewards of all that we've been given?
Yeah, good question.
Our time, our talents, our money, all of it.
Definitely.
And we can't forget where all those materials came from. The Egyptians. The Israelites were oppressed in Egypt, remember?
Yeah, I know. It's incredible. They took what had been used to enslave them and used it to build a place to worship God.
What a powerful image.
It shows that God can redeem anything. He can take what was meant for evil and transform it into something beautiful and holy.
Yeah. And remember the census. 603,550 men over 20.
It's mind-blowing, isn't it?
It really shows just how much God had kept his promise to make them into a great nation.
Absolutely.
It's like their whole story is woven right into that tabernacle.
It is.
Every single detail, the materials, the dimensions, the people who were involved, it all points back to God's faithfulness and how he was always with them.
And you know, that same story can still speak to us today.
It can.
It makes us think about how we approach God, how he is present in our lives today, and what our role is in building his kingdom.
It really does. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Exodus chapter 38, we've seen how this community came together.
Yeah.
They used their skills and all their resources to create something that would show their relationship with God.
They were fueled by their faith.
It's a really powerful image. And it leads us to this important question. How are we reflecting God's presence in our lives today? How are we building his kingdom in our communities?
Those are great questions to think about. Really important.
Okay, are you ready for our final question?
I am. Hit me with it.
All right. Considering the specific materials, the dimensions, the layout of the tabernacle courtyard, what can we infer about the Israelites' understanding of God and their relationship with Him at this point in their history?
That's a good one. I think what stands out to me is how much order and structure they put into everything.
It's true. Everything was so specific.
Yeah. The measurements, the instructions, the way they kept track of all the materials, it's like they were saying, we're taking this very seriously. And I think it points to them understanding God as someone who values order and precision.
Like they were saying, this is how we connect with the divine in this very specific way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And think about the materials they used: gold, silver, bronze.
That was valuable stuff.
It was. And they didn't hold back. They used it all to build this place to worship. It shows just how much they revered God. They wanted to honor him with the best of everything.
They weren't messing around.
No, they weren't. And then there's all that symbolism that's woven into the design.
I know, it's everywhere.
Like that single entrance facing east,
Right?
the bronze overlay on the altar.
And that woven screen at the gateway.
It all points back to a deeper understanding of who God is and how he interacts with us.
They were building a visual representation of their faith.
They were. It was like a physical model of their beliefs and values, their understanding of God.
Wow, that's amazing. Makes you think about what ours would look like today.
It does, doesn't it?
What would our visual representation of our faith look like?
Yeah.
What would it tell us about how we understand God and our relationship with Him?
That's a great question to think about. And I hope this deep dive has given you some things to ponder as you explore that.
It really has. As we wrap up, we just want to encourage you to keep digging into Exodus and the whole Bible, for that matter.
There's so much in there.
There's so much to learn and to be inspired by. Thanks for joining us today.
And remember, the best way to understand something is to really dive deep.
So we've been talking about how the Israelites built this elaborate courtyard for the tabernacle
Mm-hmm.
with all this symbolic meaning and all this reverence for God. But what does it all mean for us today? What can we take away from all of this?
Well, I think it challenges us to think about how we approach God in our own lives, you know?
Yeah.
Do we approach him with that same intentionality, that same reverence, that same desire to honor him with the very best that we have?
It really makes you stop and think.
It does, because the Israelites poured their heart and soul into creating this space, a physical space, that would reflect their relationship with God.
That's true.
And I think it can inspire us to think about how we can do the same thing in our own lives,
Yeah.
even if we're not building a tabernacle, you know?
Exactly. So we may not be building physical structures like they did,
Right.
but we're always building something.
That's true.
Our lives, our relationships, our communities.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think the tabernacle reminds us that we should be doing all of that with intentionality,
Mm-hmm.
with reverence, and with a deep understanding of who God is and how much he loves us.
Beautifully said. I think that's a perfect note to end on.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Exodus chapter 38.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you've gained some new perspectives and that you feel inspired to continue exploring the Bible.
Yes, keep digging and keep seeking truth.
You never know what you might find. And to all of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you on our next deep dive.